All right, let's get into this. Why 80% of men are invisible?
What is the full spectrum of individuals that you've spent time working with on a one-on-one basis or through your practice?
I worked with people out of MIT, incubators, CEOs, entrepreneurs, things like that. So a lot of high performance people, but then I've also worked with like losers, let's say. So this is also more intensely. This is everything from 25-year-old kid who's living in his mom's basement playing video games all day to people who are even homeless. So I've worked with like basically like the whole spectrum. And yeah.
You used the word losers there, and you did little air quotes for anyone that can't see you right now. I'm really interested when you talked about incels as well, whether the way society is and the way that we're heading in terms of clarity over what it is to be a man has had any impact on those people that you referred to as incels. Like I'm because we now have.
Why do we attribute losers in quotation mark to incels now? When did we get to that jump?
This digital world that we can live our lives in as a distraction from the real world. And there's now more confusion than ever over what it is to be a man and the role of a man in a, and then we look at the stats around suicidality. And I think in Europe, the biggest killer of men under the age of 45 is themselves currently. Is the shifting idea of what it is to be a man having an impact on people's sense of self and their purpose?
100%.
All right, before we get into the whole thing, what even is incel definition? What even is the definition of an incel? Because honestly, it's something that I keep seeing pop up and it keeps popping up, and I am like, not once have I used the word myself. So I'm like, I know it's used as an insult, but what insult? So an incel is a member of an online community of young men who considers themselves unable to attract women sexually, typically associated with views that are hostile towards women and men who are sexually active. So people that can't get laid, that are jealous of others who do get laid? Why are we using the term, like, why, first of all, why is the incel even used to determine quotation mark losers in the first place? How? I'm already like, I'm 1 minute into the video and I'm already like, huh? About it? Because like, you can be a loser from so many stances, but like, just not being able to find a person, like a partner, in my opinion, doesn't make you a loser. But I don't know, man. Like, I disagree. I just disagree with it. Oh, all right. Let's go back to the video.
The role of a man in a, and then we look at the stats around suicidality. And I think in Europe, the biggest killer of men under the age of 45 is themselves currently. Is the shifting idea of what it is to be a man having an impact on people's sense of self and their purpose?
100%.
Yeah.
So there's a crisis that's going on in men. And people think that this is new, but I don't think it's new. It's always been there. So if you look at like, even 50, 60 years ago, 80% of suicides are still going to be men. So historically, men have been killing themselves for like 100 years and no one's been paying attention. We're just noticing now because the problem seems to be getting worse. So
wait. At the risk of like people misinterpreting what I'm about to say, are we noticing? Because I feel like the majority of people are still very much not noticing it, or purposely not caring. So like, are we noticing it?
There's a couple of things that are really interesting to understand. So one is that if we look at what technology is doing to our brains, the first thing that it's doing is it is externalizing our attention. So if you look back, like let's say 1,000 years ago, as human beings, we spent a lot more time with ourselves. So let's say that you and I go out hunting, and then let's say you shoot an arrow at a deer and you miss, and then I shoot an arrow at a deer and I hit. So in this moment, I'm superior to you. And then we pick up the deer and we're carrying it back. And then we have about 2 or 3 hours to take that emotional insult and we kind of process it. We just give our mind space to process it, which it does automatically.
Okay.
Now, if you look at what happens in people's days, they don't actually have any time to process what happens to them because we are so constantly distracted by external things. So I don't know if you're like this, but I was in this point where I was
Makes sense.
idiotically efficient. So I would wake up in the morning and I would listen to a podcast while I'm like doing my exercise or whatever. And then even when I'm cooking, I'm listening to a lecture. And then like when I'm walking to the train, I have earbuds in and I'm listening to a lecture there.
Damn. I don't take it to that level of extremeness because like I like being able to be with my own thoughts. What he's describing there is people that fill every single moment of their life, fill up the space so that they don't listen to their thoughts. They don't actually spend the time to process their own thoughts, their own emotions, how they feel. Like they don't analyze themselves. And like in his case, right, he's doing it for efficiency purpose, like he is maximizing his time. But a lot of people do it by filling that void with video games or like with books or hobbies or just distracting streams, right? Distracting themselves from themselves.
On the train, I'm reading. I wanted my life to be completely efficient. I didn't want to waste a single moment.
I literally listen to the news in the shower. It's
right. So we don't want to waste time. And so if you really think about it, where's the attention of your mind? Your mind is pointed outside of you. And so then what happens is once we do not pay attention to ourselves, we lose sight of our internal signals. Literally in the same way that if you raise a child in a dark cave, the photoreceptors in their eyes won't develop. They will atrophy. So anything that the mind does not get access to will start to atrophy. If I don't practice Spanish, I'm going to forget Spanish. The brain is a very efficient organ. So as we externalize our attention, we lose sight of our internal signals. We don't know who we are anymore. And now if I don't know who I am, how do I figure out who I'm supposed to be? I pay attention to the outside. Where are the answers? They're on the outside. So this person is talking about masculinity. This person is talking about what it means to be a man. This person is talking about what it means to be a man.
Interesting perspective, honestly. Like, I never stopped to think of it from that angle. It's quite it's quite revealing when you just stop and you're like, huh. Yeah, that makes sense. That actually makes sense. Because you are especially taught to be productive, right? Like that's one of the things that is kind of instilled in you. You gotta like, you gotta graduate from a good college. You gotta get a good job. You gotta be someone. You gotta get a promotion. You gotta, right? You gotta go on the treadmill. And that's kind of being instilled into you. So a lot of people forget to just breathe, to just take a walk, to just relax, to just be there with their emotions and their feelings. So it's very interesting to see that it kind of explains why so many people are a lot more easily manipulated or rather influenced nowadays. Because they're constantly connected and they're constantly being distracted by things. Like you always have your phone, you can always read an article, you can always read a book. You can always like busy yourself compared to before. And I never stopped to think about it from that angle. It's very fascinating.
And now since I don't have any internal source of information, I'm trying to figure out what it means to be a man from the outside world. And this is when men get truly fucked. Because what it means to be a man, we are getting all kinds of mixed signals. So on the one hand, it means being physically fit. On the other hand, it means being a provider. On one hand, it means having sex with as many women as you can find. On the other hand, it means having sex with just one woman and being a really solid man and being a good father. And then there's also people telling us that being a man means that you're shit, right? That you're toxic, that your testosterone level makes you violent, that you're evil, that you're privileged, that there's a patriarchy, all this kind of stuff. So
yeah, like that the world is your fault and everything like that. Like it is really a shitty you do get a lot of mixed signals, and it really depends on what you listen and tune into. It's why we have people that are able to like get such massive followings that cater to either one side or the other. It also really depends on how you viewed yourself when you first entered the ecosystem, because the algorithm is going to push that narrative as well, right? Like if you, let's say you're really into gym stuff, you're going to see that the world wants you to be a buff man, right? It wants you to be fit, to be like, you need to have muscles, you need to focus on that. That's also another thing that a lot of people, I guess, don't really consider, that the algorithm is tailored in a way, and you're just going to see that.
So we're getting all this information from the outside about what it means to be a man. And so the other, like, there are all kinds of interesting ramifications of this. So men in today's society are not allowed to complain. So if you complain and you're a successful person or a privileged person, everyone is going to think you're arrogant. Everyone is going to think, oh my God, who's this fucking guy? This guy doesn't know what my life is like. How does he have any right to complain? And even your mind will tell you this. You'll look at these people and you'll be like, yeah, I don't have a right to complain. But now we need to stop for a second and think about what it does to your psychology when...
It reminds me of everyone hating on people that are rich that dare mention something. It's like they can't possibly have the same human things that we deal with, you know?
You as a human being are not allowed to articulate your suffering. I've worked with people who've grown up in abusive households where children will say to their parents, "Mommy, Daddy, I'm hurting." And the parent smacks them across the face. How dare you? You're so lucky. You don't realize the sacrifices I make for you. It's traumatizing to the child. What
the fuck? The more I listen to these things, the more I'm freaking grateful for growing up in the family that I did. Jesus Christ.
And they say, I am suffering, and no one listens. This is what we're doing to the generation of men. People are saying, I am suffering. For 100 years, men have been killing themselves. 80% of suicides are men. The most dangerous thing for a man under 45 is themselves. And these people have been literally killing themselves because no one has been listening to them. So in the same way that you grow up with as a child in a household that's abusive, where no one takes you seriously, no one listens to your suffering, and now we even have successful men who are not allowed to complain. So the psychological impact is the same. Anytime you have a human being who is suffering in some way and they cannot find connection with another human being, they cannot find compassion with another human being, that person is going to feel isolated. And if
it kind of sucks because finding compassion online is very rare. Like, you will find compassion from people that want your wallet. You will find fake compassion for people who want to feel like they are doing you a favor, but don't actually do you a favor. Like, it is so hard to actually find somewhere where you can talk and have that. Like, finding a place where you belong is online, in my opinion, is very hard. And I feel like people being thrown into the depths, like, whenever you are online, I feel like you're being thrown in controversy, you're being thrown in hatred, because that's what generates clicks. And you're seeing the worst of the worst of the worst. You're seeing the most toxic views and stances. I had like someone come in my chat, we were having conversation yesterday, and they said that men are hated. And I had to stop and say that, no, you are not hated. There is a view online, there are a lot, there's like a minority that's very loud and vocal that hates men, but you are not hated by a lot of us. Like, most people are not how the online portrays it. Like, you're just thrown in that pot with people that are seething and hating. If you escape that hell, you're not going to have that. You just need to stop tuning into that. It's very hard, however, because like if you stay online, if you stay in that chamber, like Twitter specifically, but it happens somewhere else. It happens on most social platforms. Like, people are not going to be like that. Yeah, it's just a very, very, very vocal minority, sadly. I do know, like, in a lot of cases, men are raised to not show emotion, that they need to be strong, that they need to not cry. And that is something that, at least in this side of Europe, is enforced. Like, as in, it's ingrained in you as you grow up. And that sucks. That is something that, like, people that are told that they cannot cry, that they cannot show weakness, that they cannot say that they can't do something or that it hurts, right? And that still happens. And it's very hard to break, like, mentally from that. It's very hard to, like, step aside from years of being told that you need to be in a certain way and to seek help. Sadly. It is, like, a very sad thing because it prevents so many people from reaching out because of fear that they would be called weak. Or they reach out to people that have the exact same belief that will look at them. It's like, it really sucks. And personally, I think it helps to journal. It might not work for everyone, but it's definitely, if you feel like you can't talk to someone, journal about it. Like, put it down on paper and then read it to yourself and think about, like, if a friend told you that, how would you react to it?
If you look at the statistics on suicide, it's very interesting.
Now you have a rage journal. I have one too. Like, generally when I have strong feelings and I feel like I can't talk about it, I just write it down. I write it down, I get it on my system, and then I read it to myself. And I'm like, now that's just silly. I kind of logically debate with myself after I got out my emotions. After I had a good cry with myself in private.
So the number one thing that correlates with male suicide is not depression. And this is super scary. There's one study I saw recently that suggests that 50% of men who kill themselves have no history or evidence of mental illness. Yeah. And this, I believe the statistic in my clinical practice because I know what depression looks like. I know what bipolar disorder looks like. And half the men that I've worked with, at least, are not actually mentally ill. See, mental illness means a pathology of the mind, which means that the mind is malfunctioning. Most of the suicidal men that I work with, their mind isn't malfunctioning. They genuinely have a life that is no longer worth living. They're looking at things and objectively realizing that there's no way out of this situation.
That's sad. That is very sad. But also, like, I believe it. Like, it is one of those scenarios where you feel like there's no one you can turn to, and you feel like there's no reason, like, you don't have a purpose in life, like, that you're not welcome or wanted. And, like, a lot of people aren't willing to look at it and realize that they're participating in making this toxic environment as well. Like, it's very hard for someone to show emotion because, like, if you show emotion to the wrong person, they will mentally scar you. Like, they will tell you, like, oh my God, you're weak, right? You're showing emotion. Then you have, like, the predators that will prey upon you for money. So if you show weakness and you have money, they will prey upon you for money. So, like, that's another risk. And it's like, oh man. It really sucks. It really sucks to be in such a situation. It's like you reach a stage where you look at the world and you just don't see a reason to live. And I hope that, personally, I hope I never reach a point like that. Because, like, it definitely looks like it feels very bleak to be at that stage of life.
So they turn to suicide. So I know it's kind of like a very controversial statement, but I think that's what my clinical practice has shown, and there's some research to even back that up. So if we sort of look at what's going on with men, we're sort of, they have nowhere to turn to. And the number one thing that correlates with it is not mental illness, but is a sense of thwarted belongingness. So this is kind of like multivariate regression analysis. But basically what happens is what causes people to kill themselves is they try to connect with others and they get rejected. So it's specifically a very specific research term called thwarted belongingness. So I try to belong to a group, and that group, or multiple groups usually, will thwart my attempts to join the tribe, to join the community. And this is what actually correlates a lot with suicidality.
I feel like that's why a lot of people end up going to the gym, right? because like at the gym, a lot of people are a lot more accepting because people focus more on their bodies and their health. At least that's in a way how I would look at it. Perhaps like people there are more willing to, like, you're working on yourself externally. I'm not sure, I've never seen anyone speak at the gym. Interesting. Like I know like a lot of gyms, the people tend to like communicate more with each other. But yeah, you kind of end up having at least a goal or a purpose, right? You replace the need to belong to a group with having a reason to live.
So what's going on with men right now is that we really don't allow them to suffer, because then you're not manly. And we're so externalized with our attention that we're not connecting with ourselves. And so we're looking to other people to tell us what it means to be a man. But that may or may not work for you, right? That may have been what worked for them. So then we kind of get into this problem where we're disconnected from ourselves. And then like the world doesn't accept us. We're not allowed to suffer. And that's what creates the problem.
What is the remedy to this?
So I think the first thing is we must reconnect with ourselves, right? So when you're kind of saying like, why does everyone think, oh, I need to like achieve this, I need to make this money and things like that. Where did you learn that you should do all that? You learned all that from the outside. Instagram, right? So we get fed all of these ideas because if you look at all these influencers, what are they doing? They're never crying. They're smiling. Some of them will even pay very attractive women to take pictures with them.
Well, some of them are crying, but they're crying and uploading it for ulterior motives, right?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of them are genuinely suffering too. But then it's also like,
it's about optics and perspective. A lot of like most of the things that you see on social media are fake, and it's a curated thing where people will show a certain side of them when it comes to influencers. It's not necessarily true for like your average Joe poster, but then there's like your average Joe poster. You have the people that are anonymously their worst variant of themselves. Like even there, you have people that are putting the worst thing that they can possibly put out there just because they can, just because it's anonymous, and just because for some of them it's fun, for some of them it's revenge, and for some of them it's a business as well. Like there are people that will spew hate comments on alternate accounts so that they can farm on their main account that they're being harassed and targeted. And it's just an optics show where there's no actual people that are harassing them. It's just themselves harassing themselves. It's very hard to be able to see anything on social media that is genuine. And you should just assume that most things are just not genuine when it comes to it. And that there is an angle. It's sad, and maybe it's my cynic perspective as someone that's been online for a very long time. But it definitely does protect you from falling prey and believing such lies. But it is a lot of fakeness. There is a lot of fakeness. Everything is catered in a way. Like, people don't live rosy lives. Even the rich people that you think have all the money in the world to solve their problems, they still have problems. They just have money on top of that. The world is plastic. Life's fantastic. I'm a Barbie girl.
Like, I mean, there's all kinds of weird stuff going on. So one thing is like people say that men, we don't allow men to be emotional nowadays, but people say, oh, men are allowed to cry. So this is something that I experienced even in my marriage, where we allow men to cry, but we don't allow men to be angry. But why are men no longer allowed to be angry? Just think about it for a second. So anger is just a completely normal emotion, right? Mm-hmm. But if I'm in a situation where I'm in an argument with my wife and I feel emotion A and I express emotion A and she feels emotion B and she expresses emotion B, these two things should be equal, right? We as both human beings get to express what we feel. Now, in the case of me expressing anger and her expressing sadness, she's crying and I'm yelling. Suddenly, I've become a villain.
It's so interesting. I saw a viral tweet yesterday. It was someone Googling, my wife is yelling at me, what should I do? And then my husband is yelling at me, what should I do? When they Googled, my husband is yelling at me, what should I do? Domestic violence helpline comes up as like a Google pop-up. when you Google, my wife is yelling at me, what should I do? Nothing comes up.
Yeah.
Because obviously, as you said, in the case of villainization, I know that most domestic violence comes from men, but it's interesting that we see the emotion.
Most reported domestic violence comes from men. I feel like that's a distinction. Not saying that the statistics are not that there are more men, but a lot of cases, men will not report the fact that they are being abused. Like, and that's one fact that people don't cover. Like, I can definitely tell you the amount of times, like, I live in the Balkans, right? Like, here it's normal for a woman to hit the man over the head with a freaking pot. You're not going to see the man reporting that. Just saying.
We interpret the emotions entirely differently because of that.
Absolutely, right? So we as a society will say like, oh, men need to be in touch with their emotions, but not anger. And then this is what really screws men, because as men, we are socialized and conditioned to only feel anger. This is the only emotion you're allowed to feel as a man growing up. And this is the one emotion that gets demonized when you're older. So I'll give you a simple example.
Interesting that anger is allowed as a child, because I don't feel like even anger is allowed as a child. Because, like, you know, when kids pull the hair of girls, right? That's also considered like that you're being taught not to do that, right? Or to fight each other. I guess like competitive anger, yeah, you guys are like right with that. Competitive anger is definitely cultivated.
So like I used to get bullied a lot, right? So when I get bullied in school, like what am I supposed to do, Stephen?
In school, well, it depends if you can fight back.
Absolutely, right? It's fighting back. Like you didn't say talk to the teacher. You didn't say ask for help. You didn't say cry about it, because if I cry about it, what's going to happen, Stephen?
You're going to get bullied more.
Absolutely. So we turn every emotion. So men experience anger as something called an umbrella emotion. We literally suppress and are conditioned to suppress all other emotions except for anger.
See, like here's where I feel like it's also cultural difference, because like it might also be related to how I grew up and where I grew up in the schools that I visited. We didn't really have the deal with it thing when it came to people quarreling with each other, but we also never really had bullying, and we never had like levels of like fight back. But I guess like that's also instilled in how we grow up, because like if someone says something mean to you, you just say something mean to them. Like it's a back and forth. Regardless of whether it's a girl or a boy, we all had the you fight back mentality drilled into you. But usually with words, not with fists. Like fists were not encouraged. If like I can't speak for like my entire country, obviously. It's just like how we were taught. We were taught to be competitive in teams. We had like groups and teams. We had competitions with each other and everything. And generally, we would just talk back to each other. Like we could shout and yell at each other and be angry at each other. So yeah, we never really had fights. Just very interesting.
And then if you talk to men about their experience of life, anger is always the first thing that comes out of them.
That's not bullying. That's what I'm saying. We never had bullying. Like we didn't have bullying. I don't know if I just grew up in a very special school, but we didn't have bullies. That's or I don't know, man.
Mouth. Someone breaks up with you. How do you feel about it? Do you feel ashamed? No, that's not what we say. I feel pissed off. How could she do this to me? And then we vent that anger on the internet, and then this turns into misogyny, right? And then we get demonized for it. And it's not that there isn't, we should be harshly judged if we act on those kinds of emotions. I'm not saying that that's the case. But what we also need to consider is that the men who are saying these kinds of toxic things are saying that for a reason. This is because of their upbringing. This is because of the world that they lived in.
Mm-mm. There's also the case of people not really being forgiving towards male content creators, regardless of their age. Like, people demonized a 17-year-old for saying something misogynistic or racist. I can't remember. Like, they villainized the heck out of that person because, and like, they were genuinely trying to understand and to learn about it, and people were just not having it. Despite it being a 17-year-old, it's like the internet is very much also blurred because nowadays kids go on the internet and have accounts and everything and can access most stuff once they're 13 plus. Like, there are some places where you need to be 14 to access certain things, and obviously a lot of them are online a lot earlier than that.
Right? So we're conditioned to only experience anger. Even sadness gets turned into anger. Shame gets turned into anger. Fear gets turned into anger. Right? So if I'm afraid of something happening, what do I need? I need to man up, get angry, right? Like, let's go, son, let's go. This is the emotion that we tap into to overcome fear. So we don't feel any of those other emotions, and we're left only feeling anger.
At the very heart of aggression, I heard someone say to me once that at the very heart of aggression is some kind of insecurity. But for men, when they encounter that insecurity, they only know how to sort of manifest it as aggression.
So I wouldn't agree with the first thing, that at the heart of all anger is insecurity, but I would absolutely agree with the second thing, that the only way we know how to respond is with anger. Because
so here's the exact quote, I just found it. The source of aggression is insecurity, as we are unconsciously aware that our position in life is never secure. People feel increasingly insecure and helpless, so they will be increasingly aggressive and confrontational at a personal and a social level.
So let's tunnel down into that for a second.
I would say, like, that's a very twisted way of perceiving something and tying two things together that aren't necessarily tied together. I'm curious to see Healthy Gamer, Dr. K's perspective on it, though.
Okay, so I think that is true on some level, but also I would disagree. So the first thing is that we have parts of our brain, even animals feel anger. But I think that, like, when two dogs are fighting over territory, I don't think that that's born of some kind of identity of insecurity, right?
I love the dog example. Yeah, it's way too broad and way too vague. And yes, it can fit, but also, like, that's like saying you can put, you know, you can put a triangle in a square hole. Like, sure, you can.
So if we really look at, like, the evolutionary purpose of anger, this is my opinion, is that anger is the emotion that we feel to protect our territory. It's a protective emotion. So if I slap you across the face, what's the first thing that you're going to feel? It's going to be anger. So if I insult you, you're going to feel angry. It's fascinating the way that it works. So anger causes our thoughts to be faster. Anger causes our peripheral vision to collapse to 30 degrees. So I only see what's in front of me. And it also makes me less sensitive to pain. So, like, my nociceptors will actually, like, start to be suppressed when I feel angry, right? So if I get into a fight, I'm going to feel it tomorrow, but, like, while I'm getting hit, I'm not going to feel it. So I don't think it's born of all insecurity. I think anger is simply an evolutionary response. It's something that we experience to protect ourselves. That's why we feel angry, right? So if I attack baby bear, mama bear is going to come out angry. So it's really a protective emotion.
Confrontation, huh?
Now, I agree with the second part of the statement 100%, that when we feel insecure, especially as men, the only way we are taught to deal with our problems is through anger, right? So if I'm feeling insecure, if I'm feeling ashamed of myself, if someone's bullying me, what do? I put them in their place, right? I don't try to make peace. I don't complain to someone because no one's going to take me seriously, right? I have to stand up for myself.
So we've got the first point there about how we remedy this challenge.
It's very interesting to see that perspective because, like, generally, when you're dealt with insecurity, right? When you're dealt with being made to feel bad, as women, you're kind of taught to be the better person, to turn the other cheek, right? To, like, be better than them and not engaged. So you are taught, instead of being confrontational and being angry about it, you have to diffuse it and go away from it. Right? You have to be the better one. And as guys, like as men, you're taught to instead tackle it and beat it in a pulp, right? Like change the narrative by obliterating it. Huh.
Which is about self-expression, more self-expression. That's what I heard.
Not self-expression, introspection.
Introspection, getting to know ourselves.
Right?
Mhm.
So it's very simple. So if you look at your idea of what it means to be a man, what percentage of that idea comes outside of you?
Yeah.
And what percentage of that idea comes from within you?
About 90% comes from outside of me.
And that's why 90% of people, we're 90% fucked. Right? So, and if you look, and I'm sure you know this, and you've probably done this too, if you look at where is the goodness in your life, where does it come from, Stephen? It doesn't come from what other people have told you. They may have told you something, but then you looked within yourself and then you found that to be true.
Yeah.
The goodness in you, the motivation, the really good motivation in you, not chasing things, but the duty that you have, you know, everything that you really strive for, all that good stuff comes from inside you. And the problem is that we live in a world that pulls our attention away from ourselves.
That's a very good video and a very good way to get people to like think a bit more about themselves and how much value they put on other people's opinion and on other people's words, right? It's definitely difficult to not put value on the things that were kind of ingrained in you, but it's definitely doable to limit how much you let others influence you now. Because right now, right, if you're feeling down or you're feeling crappy, you can question yourself why. You can kind of like identify, like if you stop and you spend the time to think, why do I feel crappy? What's the number one cause? Right? For me, for example, I had to do this as a content creator. I was feeling helpless, defeated, and I was feeling like bad. And I had to stop. Like I stopped and I went, why? And it was because I was spending too much time on social media reading other people's opinion and seeing the bad in the world, seeing the crap, seeing like the shit that is online. So my solution for that was just to limit myself back. I would spend time to research stuff about, I don't know, 4 or 5 hours a day. And I limited that to 1 hour, and my mood instantly improved. Because instead of spending the time looking at shit, right, I would spend the time looking at cat pictures, cat videos. I went out. I went out in the park, and I could hear, like, people just having fun and laughing. I could hear the birds. I could feel the sun on my skin. And suddenly the world was not so shitty and crappy as the internet tells you. And then I sat down, like I actually treated myself. I went to a restaurant and I had a nice meal, which is not something I do very often because like I try to save money, right? So the thing you like, what you tell yourself is like, I don't need to buy that super expensive fancy coffee. I don't need to like go out and eat at a restaurant. I can just eat at home, right? I went and I splurged and I had someone else cook for me and I did it for myself and I sat there just enjoying a meal alone. I'm not a person that cares that I go alone in a restaurant, so like I just sat down, I had my little meal there and I was like, oh my god, this is so good. I was like, fuck, I really love food. And I was like, suddenly I couldn't care less about the fact that the world is burning somewhere else or that people think, I don't know, that VTubers are dumb, right? Like, who cares? Who cares about their opinion? I have good food and I'm healthy and I still have my cats and my parents. And it's like, just do some little things for yourself and think about the things that affect you and start cutting them out. I did that with people as well. Like, I cleansed the people that I allow into my life to have effect over me. Like, I don't know how many of you can relate to that, but if you have that type of person that's you try and be uplifting or you try to do better and they just put you down in your place every time. All right, they're like, they slap you down. They're like, oh, you got up? How dare you? And they kick you back down. That's someone that shouldn't be in your life.